The global economy is, it's just built on this incredible complexity. When you buy a coffee maker or a pair of sneakers or even just a banana, you're plugging into this vast, sprawling network.
A network of corporations, suppliers, subsidiaries.
Exactly what we call global value chains, or GVCs. And here's the fact that should really make us all pay attention.
Mhm.
GVCs are estimated to account for roughly 60% of global carbon emissions. The environmental shadow they cast is, well, it's enormous.
It's huge. And the real problem has been pinning down that impact. It's incredibly difficult.
Right, because the old ways of looking at it they were too simple. For years, you had scholars, policymakers trying to shove everything into this binary box.
It was one or the other.
A GVC was either environmentally upgrading, so doing good, cleaner practices, or it was downgrading, which is the harmful, polluting stuff.
And that binary distinction was a fundamental flaw in understanding what's actually happening. The research now clearly shows that GVC impact is nonlinear. It's profoundly context-dependent. If you only focus on whether a firm is trying to do good or bad, you completely miss the critical interaction between what that firm does and the local ecology it's operating in.
So why did that simplistic view persist for so long?
Honestly, it was administratively easier.
Yeah.
It's much simpler to measure a single variable. Did the firm invest in new tech, yes or no?
Yeah, that's a simple checkbox.
It is. It's much harder to try and map that against the dynamic geology and hydrology and even the political systems of that local environment. We have to stop seeing upgrading and downgrading as the outcomes themselves.
And see them as what?
As inputs.
Yeah.
They're just inputs that are then shaped by everything else happening on the ground.
That is the aha moment this whole deep dive is built on. So our mission today is to unpack a new, far more sophisticated framework, one that explicitly links those firm-level actions.
The upgrading and downgrading.
Right, with the local ecological condition. And the result is a clear roadmap that defines 4 distinct impacts on the natural environment and, crucially, how policy can respond effectively to each one.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's unpack this framework. It's essentially a 2x2 matrix, right? Built on 2 core components.
That's right.
Let's start with the first axis, the x-axis. This is the firm-level activity, and it's a continuum running from environmental upgrading on one side to environmental downgrading on the other.
Let's define those.
Okay, environmental upgrading is pretty straightforward. It's any strategic change that reduces a firm's ecological footprint. So this could be things like process innovations, installing state-of-the-art scrubbers using energy-efficient machinery.
Or comprehensive closed-loop waste reduction.
Right. It's the firm actively trying to clean up its act.
And then conversely, environmental downgrading is the opposite.
Yeah.
It's the harmful practices often driven by, economic pressure or just plain negligence.
And when we talk about downgrading, this is where the pollution haven hypothesis comes in, right?
It does. And this isn't just accidental bad behavior. This is a strategic economic choice. Firms are actively seeking out locations where environmental regulation is weak.
Where enforcement is lax.
Exactly. And where the economic cost of disposal or pollution is basically zero, they are externalizing their costs onto the environment.
And the local population. That's why the firm's action is only half the story.
It's only half. Now, you cross that x-axis with the y-axis, which is the local ecological context.
And this is you said the dynamic condition of the area where the GVC is operating.
It is. And it ranges from less degraded, intact ecosystems, high biodiversity, strong resilience, all the way to more degraded.
Which is characterized by severe habitat loss, high pollution, and a reduced capacity for the environment to bounce back.
Correct.
I really appreciate that you stressed the word dynamic there. It's not a static map. Why is that dynamism so crucial to get?
Because policy and governance can fundamentally transform that ecological baseline very, very quickly. Look at the dramatic shifts in Brazil's Amazon deforestation rates. They dropped significantly under earlier administrations because of strong policy enforcement. But when that enforcement was weakened under a subsequent government, deforestation rates just surged.
So the health of the forest, the context itself, changed based on politics.
It changed rapidly. Since Lula's return, we are seeing some early signs of improvement again, but those past losses dramatically changed the baseline for any GVC operating there now. The environment itself is a moving target.
Which means the impact of any single firm's action is constantly being recalculated.
Precisely.
So when you put these 2 continuums together, firm action and local context, you get these 4 impacts. Let's start with the two negative outcomes,
Okay.
because this really highlights the huge difference between, say, an immediate crisis and that gradual insidious harm.
Right. We'll begin with quadrant 1, doing damage.
Okay.
This is the catastrophic intersection of severe environmental downgrading happening in an already compromised, more degraded ecological system.
Usually made worse by weak governance.
Almost always.
This sounds like immediate compounding crisis territory. What's the classic example of this?
A classic and tragic example is Royal Dutch Shell's subsidiary, SPDC, in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. The environment there was already under enormous stress.
From decades of oil extraction.
Decades of it. Frequent spills. Then, in 2008, 2 major oil spills occurred near the Bodo fishing community. It contaminated the critical mangrove ecosystem, which is, the source of their livelihood,
And the land and water were just severely polluted.
accelerating the harm that was already there.
It's devastating to realize that even when a company like Shell later divests, it doesn't solve the problem when the local damage is so entrenched.
And the governance vacuum allows these harmful practices to just become the norm. The immediate impact is huge, but the remediation costs they're staggering. And the cleanup is extremely difficult. Legal processes take years, sometimes decades.
So this proves that when a heavily degrading firm meets the heavily degraded environment, the result is a rapid, catastrophic decline.
That is doing damage.
Okay, so how does that compare to the second negative impact?
The second negative quadrant is eroding resilience. This is where you still have environmental downgrading taking place, but the local environment starts out as less degraded
So the harm here is quieter, it's slower.
and much harder to detect before it crosses a critical threshold.
So if doing damage is the acute crisis, eroding resilience sounds more like a chronic illness. How does this framework help policymakers spot that before it's too late?
It forces us to track indicators that aren't just about pollution, but about resource exhaustion. Actors are exploiting abundant natural resources, maybe logging a pristine forest, or withdrawing too much water from a healthy river for short-term financial gains.
They aren't causing that immediate catastrophe.
No, but they are progressively undermining the ecosystem's capacity to absorb stress and regenerate. It is business as usual that, if you don't check it, pushes that healthy ecosystem into a degraded state.
And we see this with agribusiness GVCs.
Precisely. Take the example of a major M&E like Cargill in the Amazon. While the company itself might not be in a fully degraded system, its suppliers' actions can be hugely detrimental.
Right.
One supplier, Fazenda Conquista, cleared about 8 square kilometers of forest since 2013 for soy cultivation. When you clear forest for agriculture, especially in a biodiverse area like that, you're progressively reducing the system's capacity to maintain moisture to host species.
They're exploiting the resilience until it snaps.
Exactly, making the entire region more vulnerable to future droughts or fires.
Okay, now let's shift to the positive side of this map, where environmental upgrading is the dominant factor. The ideal scenario is quadrant third, doing good.
This is upgrading that's occurring in a less degraded environment.
This sounds like the perfect alignment. You have GVC actors leveraging a healthy, intact ecological baseline, and their positive activities help maintain or even enhance that environmental quality.
A great example comes from the outdoor clothing M&E Patagonia, operating in the Patagonia region of South America.
Sure.
Their sustainability commitments are deep. They have their Worn Wear program promoting repair and reuse, a goal of 100% renewable energy. And in the relatively low degradation environment of places like Argentina and Chile, Patagonia partners with local ranchers
To do what, specifically?
to promote sustainable grazing practices. This work actively enhances the biodiversity and ecological integrity of the native grasslands.
That is a meaningful positive impact. But let's be critical for a second. Isn't it a lot easier for a premium brand like Patagonia, whose whole business model relies on the perceived health of the outdoors, to do good?
That's a crucial point. For Patagonia, doing good is completely aligned with their brand value. It's a competitive advantage.
Right.
For a low-margin commodity chain, the pressure to sustain that level of upgrading is much, much higher.
So does this framework offer any hope for them?
It does. It shows that even those commodity firms, if they are reducing harm effectively, can eventually shift the local environment to a place where doing good becomes achievable. And maybe even cheaper in the long run, because they avoid those future remediation costs.
And that leads us to the final and I think critically important positive quadrant, reducing harm.
This is where environmental upgrading is taking place, but it's occurring in a more degraded environment.
So here, the upgrading is fundamentally restorative. It's remedial. The goal isn't to enhance a healthy ecosystem, it's to slow, halt, or partially reverse ongoing degradation.
It's hard, messy work. A powerful illustration of this is Unilever's sustainable palm oil sourcing in Indonesia.
Right. Indonesia is a severely degraded environment. It lost something like 26 million hectares of tree cover between 2001 and 2019.
Mostly due to expanding palm oil plantations. So what Unilever did was commit to sustainable sourcing. They used satellite monitoring to ensure their suppliers avoid further deforestation or damage to critical peatlands.
So their commitment to sourcing, what was it, 86% of its palm oil sustainably by the end of 2023 is a huge positive action.
It is, but its main function is to focus on restoration and slowing down that massive rate of loss. They are attempting to stabilize an ecosystem that is currently hemorrhaging resources.
So reducing harm is the essential first step toward true ecological recovery in these damaged areas. But what happens next?
Well, the temporal dimension here is vital. If a firm successfully reduces harm through sustained upgrading, and that's reinforced by good policy, they can actually gradually shift the ecological condition from more degraded toward less degraded.
They change the environment itself.
They do. They inch it toward a state where doing good becomes feasible. It shows that policy isn't just reactive, it can proactively sculpt the future context.
And this framework isn't just a conceptual exercise, it's a guide for policy action.
It is.
So let's transition to the application. You talk about instrument choice theory. How does knowing which of these four quadrants a GVC operation falls into tell policymakers what levers to pull?
Instrument choice theory helps policymakers select the, let's say, optimal mix of instruments for these complex contexts. The framework really identifies two main policy objectives based on where you are on that map.
Okay, what's the first one?
Policy objective one is enhancing positive impact. This applies to the GVCs that are already doing good or reducing harm.
So they're already willing to upgrade.
Exactly. So the primary mechanism to support them is increased environmental innovation. We want to reduce the cost and risk for them to make those positive changes.
So for these firms, we focus on the carrot. What specific tool types achieve that?
Financial and organizational tools. Financial tools are direct incentives. Think of government funding like Canada's Zero Plastic Waste Initiative.
Right.
It offers non-repayable contributions to projects that prevent plastics from entering the environment. These subsidies and tax breaks just make sustainable outcomes financially preferable.
And the organizational tools. These sound like they're designed to help coordinate these really complex supply chains.
They are. Organizational tools foster deeper, coordinated upgrading across the entire GVC by setting structured, recognized standards. This includes things like the ISO 14001 certification.
An environmental management standard?
Right. Or the Equator Principles, which are a set of requirements for financial institutions to assess and manage environmental risk before they even fund a major project. They provide structure and credibility for firms that are already committed to upgrading.
Okay, now for the stick. How do policymakers handle the negative impacts, the doing damage and eroding resilience quadrants, where the firm is actively choosing downgrading practices?
So policy objective 2 is transforming that negative impact. This requires firms to disrupt environmentally harmful activities that are deeply locked into their economic models. The mechanism here has to be increased environmental regulation.
You need tools that compel, constrain, or punish behavior.
You do. And for this objective, the recommended tools are authoritative and informational. Authoritative tools are your formal laws and sanctions that rely on coercion.
So this is actual law.
This is the law. Countries recognized for high environmental policy stringency, like Sweden, Finland, or France, they rely on detailed environmental codes or nature conservation acts to set enforceable boundaries and mitigate downgrading immediately. If you are doing damage, the state steps in and compels you to change.
So you need that authoritative regulation for firms actively harming the environment, but you need funding and flexible standards to help the good firms innovate faster. Is there some kind of inherent friction between those two policy objectives?
Absolutely. Policymakers are constantly balancing the administrative burden of strict authoritative rules with the need for flexibility that fosters innovation. If regulation is too rigid, if you only use the stick, it can stifle the very upgrading process you hope to encourage in your reducing harm firms.
And I guess that's where the informational tools come in, relying more on public scrutiny and market pressure.
Correct. Informational tools aim to shame or influence behavior by forcing transparency. A powerful example in the U.S. is the EPA's Toxics Release Inventory.
Which requires industrial facilities to publicly report their annual emissions of toxic chemicals.
Hundreds of them. And this publicly accessible data is then used by communities, NGOs, investors. It creates market pressure that incentivizes firms to reduce emissions without the government having to mandate every single change.
I see.
Similarly, in China, the Pollution Information Transparency Index ranks cities on their environmental transparency, influencing local government and corporate behavior through, well, public naming and shaming.
That leverages reputational risk.
It does. It forces shifts toward upgrading among firms that were previously focused on downgrading.
This gives us a phenomenal, really context-sensitive roadmap. The core conceptual shift is so clear. GVC environmental impact isn't just about a firm's intentions.
No.
It's about the dynamic interaction of those actions with the local context, that less or more degraded environment.
And the essential takeaway for you, listening, is that a one-size-fits-all approach to environmental governance simply will not work in the complex reality of GVCs. Trying to regulate a firm that is doing damage with a financial incentive, a carrot, will fail. Conversely, hitting a firm that is reducing harm with excessive coercive regulation, a stick, might just stifle its ability to innovate. Different impacts require a carefully tailored policy tool mix.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. Most multinational enterprises operate GVCs that span the entire globe, which means their operations are highly likely to straddle all four of these quadrants at the same time. They might be doing good in their heavily regulated home country,
but simultaneously eroding resilience in a resource-rich developing market.
So the ultimate complexity of global sustainability is this: designing a policy portfolio, a mix of financial, authoritative, informational, and organizational interventions, that's required to ensure that every single one of a company's globally dispersed operations is actively reducing harm or doing good.
What policy levers would be required to manage a single company operating in all four contexts simultaneously?
We hope this framework gives you a stronger lens for evaluating the true environmental footprint and the regulatory requirements of our global economy. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.